I'm back, and apparently, so is film. In a surprise and rare performance, Ryan Coogler's Sinners has taken over and captured American culture. This film's popularity will inspire countless hashtag discourse due to all the topics it covers. So I wanted to provide my recap and review before this film descends into immediate debate territory. Before I get into the details of the film, let's talk about some basic facts. This film has a runtime of 2 hours and 17 minutes. But hold on, even though you do have to stay tight for that duration, you do have to stay after because there's a pretty lengthy post-credit scene that adds a bit to the story. The director and writer for the film is Ryan Coogler, best known probably for the Black Panther films that I'm sure everybody knows about, but also you have Creed films, and to clarify, I think he only directed the first Creed film, but also Fruitvale Station. He also wrote the script, and I think the script for this film is really where the magic lies. Of course, there's a lot with the cinematography and the music as well, but I think that to take on this type of film, you have to start with a good foundation. And in my opinion, a good foundation for a good film is always a good script. And of course, I also talked about music playing a huge role in this film. I'd even argue that this film is kind of on the border of a musical. I don't think it goes all the way into musical territory, but it definitely skirts that line. And Ludwig Göransson is really important for tying all the themes of the film together through sound. And I think he just does a phenomenal job at making the music feel very visceral and tying that into the actions that are taking place on the screen. So this cast is basically everyone Black and beautiful. We have Michael B. Jordan. Of course, I'm sure most of you are familiar with him. Wunmi Mosaku, who I love. She was in Lovecraft Country. She's also British, so she's been in Black Mirror, but also a lot of really popular British TV as well. I just love her. She's just a beauty. And as a thicker Black woman, I always love representation of women with dark skin and who are a little bigger. Here she is, Miles Canton. This is actually his debut acting, and this was a surprise to me, but he really kills it on screen. And I really have no doubt that Hollywood's about to take him under their wings and make sure he's basically in every young Black man role that is to come for the next 5 years. We have Jack O'Connell. A lot of people know him from Skins, but he's basically been employed since he was a kid. Does also a very phenomenal job, and it does have genuine Irish heritage, which ties in with his character. And speaking of somebody whose actual heritage ties in with their character, we have Haley Stenfield. She's amazing. She's been acting since she was like 9 years old, so she definitely fit in with this crew, and her acting was very elevated based off the entire ensemble really clearly supporting each other. We have Jamie Lawson, who I'm not that familiar with, but Omar Benson Miller, the fake son of sorry, I totally forgot the name of the actor, and I'm not even going to try because I know my brain isn't going to do well today. But Omar Benson Miller does a phenomenal job as well, has a lot of very comedic moments, and the legendary Delroy Lindo. This film was just phenomenal, and I'm excited to see how this film can catapult the career of all these people. People like Michael B. Jordan and Haley Stenfield don't necessarily need a catapult, but someone who just started off like Miles Canton is definitely going to benefit from the popularity that this film inevitably is going to sustain for probably the next year. And now the ideal audience here, I say, is a breathing human. I say this because, to be honest, and I'm gonna expose myself, even though I'm Black, this is the type of film that I don't think is generally for me. I think that films that try to explicitly touch on themes about racism tend to feel a little bit too contrived and overwrought. And by the way, this is not me saying like race shouldn't be discussed in films. I just prefer abstract discussions of race because I find them far more interesting. But this film actually felt very fresh and engaging beyond the obvious racial commentary, which then amplifies the importance of the racial commentary. So I think this is a film that clearly could also work in terms of its plot without the racial aspects, although that plays a huge role in the plot. But you could just see this idea of these criminal twins coming back to a town and trying to start a club, and that club then being destroyed by vampires. There are racial elements, but I think that film plot alone would work. But because that film plot alone works, the racial commentary is elevated by the way that it makes the tensions inherent to this plot already even more elevated. And I think this film also feels heavily inspired by HBO's Lovecraft Country, which is also an adaptation of a book, but this feels like a much better version of Lovecraft Country. And I think actually Lovecraft Country was the show that kind of made me really kind of close the door a little bit to films like this, because again, they sometimes feel very contrived and they try to put too many themes into one show or into one movie, and then the film ends up feeling very messy, and then the characters don't even feel fully fleshed out because the characters are just vectors for the themes that the writer and the director want to portray. But these characters, this film, this plot, everything felt independent of the race, which I think makes race commentary even better when the plot works without even race being a factor, if that makes any sense. And I hope people don't think I'm one of those race neutral is important, race doesn't matter, and I hate when people bring up race. No, that's not me. I just think that there is a way where somebody wants to talk about race and discrimination, and unfortunately the story becomes race and discrimination as opposed to the characters living through race and discrimination, if that makes sense. Anyway, this film does a really great job at all of that, so let's just get into it. Now, this recap is going to be a little bit different because there are a lot of historical facts inserted into the movie, and I'm going to comment on some of the things that stood out to me and that I have familiarity with. Also, the film is extremely horny and beautifully so, but I've left out most of the references to sex because it's pretty self-explanatory. It's hot actors having sex with other hot actors. So without further ado, let's get into my recap of Sinners. The film opens with young Samuel, or Sammy, stumbling into his father's church service. He's covered in blood and holding the end of a broken guitar. His father asks him to repent and return to church. We then flash back to the day before. We learn that we're in Mississippi, 1932. The infamous twins Smoke and Stack, returned from a 7-year stint in Chicago. They worked for Al Capone and stole some money in order to start a juke joint. Smoke is the more level-headed, business-oriented twin, while Stack is reckless and emotionally driven. They pick up their cousin Samuel/Shammy, who we learn lives in sharecropper land. Sharecropping was essentially a proto-slavery construction that kept African Americans indentured on plantations after they were technically supposed to be freed. I'm not even going to go into the very brief Reconstruction period. All you have to know is by the 20th century, the South says we're going to figure out to make sure these people stay in their lane. The film shows how one of the methods of exploitation was for sharecroppers to be paid in currency only valuable on the plantation. This is also one of the reasons for the great migration of African Americans from the South to the North and the West. The Jim Crow dynamics kept most African Americans unable to access the freedom that they were promised after Emancipation Proclamation. So the twins participated in this great migration very briefly, but tell Sammy that the North had the same dynamics as the South, except that instead of fields, they were subjugated in a concrete jungle. The men stop at a hidden truck, which presumably contains their stolen goods, and are confronted with a hissing rattlesnake, an omen of things to come. The men split up, Samuel joining Stake and Smoke going solo. Smoke goes into town and meet the Chows, Grace and Bo. The Chows of Chinese descent own 2 grocery stores, one that serves the black people and the other that serves white people. They supply the twins with the food for the juke joint, and Grace makes the sign for the joint. So a little history about Chinese people in the Delta. The 1896 Supreme Court case Plessy v. Ferguson actually provides some context to how white people saw Asian people during this time. In a dissenting opinion, Justice Harlan mentions Chinese people and states, by the statute in question, a Chinaman can ride in the same passenger coach with white citizens of the United States, while citizens of the black race in Louisiana are to be criminals liable to imprisonment if they ride a public coach occupied by citizens of the white race. Essentially, Chinese people existed as a bridge between black and white people, while belonging to neither. After the end of slavery, some plantation owners used Chinese labor as an alternative. However, the Chinese people quickly saw the exploitative dynamic and, to gain their version of freedom, opened up grocery stores throughout the South. It's clear that a lot of the information Coogler got for the Chinese characters came from this Al Jazeera video about Chinese people in the Mississippi Delta. I highly recommend you watching that video to get more information about the actual experience. So just Google Al Jazeera, Chinese people, Mississippi Delta, and there's about a 9-minute video that interviews people who actually are descended of basically the Chows. And actually, Chow is the name of the person, the main interviewee in that video. So I think that Ryan Coogler saw that video, knew that he had to incorporate that in some way. Back to the film. Smoke connects with Annie, who is his former partner. I think it's implied that they were husband and wife, but it's not very clear. Either way, he's a horrible husband, leaving her for 7 years. They lost an infant and share in that pain. Annie, played by the dominating and beautiful Wunmi Mosaki, believes in traditional African religions and uses it to keep the twins safe, including providing Smoke with an amulet that keeps the evil spirits out, and that'll be relevant later. But I also do want to clarify that she's not practicing voodoo here. She is practicing hoodoo. Hoodoo is basically taking away all the religious aspects of voodoo and just kind of practicing what practices need to keep the spirits out, if that makes any sense. It's just a removal of the actual religious part of voodoo. And just to give context, voodoo is a real religion. Unfortunately, because of colonialism, most people don't think of it that way. Anyway, Stack connects with Mary, who is his childhood sweetheart, who now lives in Arkansas with her white husband. We learned that Mary, played by Haley Stanfield, who is actually 1/8 Black, Mary is 1/8 Black and is passing. Mary is a fascinating case because, again, let's talk about that very famous 1896 Plessy v. Ferguson case. In Plessy v. Ferguson, Homer Plessy bought a first-class rail ticket in Louisiana. He was denied service because he was a Black man. So imagine my shock in law school when I actually read the opinion and found out that Plessy was 7th, 8th Caucasian and 1/8 Black. And this is explicit in the opinion. And again, the Plessy v. Ferguson case was what sustained separate but equal policy until Brown v. Board a couple decades later. Segregation in Jim Crow South was extreme and insidious, as white people wanted to exploit the labor of Black people at any and all costs. Haley Stanfield and a lot of people who quote-unquote pass today would have been considered Black in the Jim Crow South. I recently read Nella Larson's book Passing, and if you're more interested on that subject, I would highly recommend reading that short book to get an idea of why the film is so focused on the danger inherent in Mary hanging around Black people that she was raised with. Ultimately, if her husband found out that she was Black, yes, even 1/8 Black, violence could fall upon her and any children she bore with her husband. So that's the reality. I went to a lot of elite universities, and so my experience in both my elite universities that I went to was I would meet some of these people who graduated from these universities in the 1960s and 1970s. So they're super old, but what was so wild to me in meeting these people is that they are people that I think conventionally, to me, I wouldn't consider them Black. These are people who could pass, but the reality for them was that there was no way. They were raised around Black people because their parents were 1/4 Black, because their grandparents were half Black. All of this led to them being considered Black and not allowing them to have access to resources available to white people. And this happened even in places like California, which is considered, right, like, oh, Jim Crow was only in the South. No, California also had some of these inherent laws in place as well. So again, really sad history, but I hope that people have more compassion. And I say this as somebody who is American but of Haitian descent. I hope people have a lot more compassion for how Americans take the 1-drop rule, because the reality is the 1-drop rule is epic and it is alive and well, and it's the reason why so many people feel so proud of their Black heritage, because not that long ago, your 1/8 Blackness would have caused you to be identified with Black people altogether. The only comment I would make is that I do think somebody like Haley Stanfield probably wouldn't actually know any sharecroppers. There's still classism and colorism within the Black community, so she would probably be considered in a different class, but of course she could do a Plessy and be like, look, you're not going to let me in first class anyway, so I'm going to stand behind my people, which is what Homer Plessy did. Anyway, back to the film. I think the show might be talking about a little bit in this film, comparing what happened to Smoke and Steak, that Black men, when they do something wrong, oftentimes you can look at their partner to suggest maybe light is right is the wrong route. And Shannon Sharpe has recently been caught up in some trouble with that. But I don't think that commentary really maps onto this plot all too well, because I actually don't think that Coogler cares about that. I think he's simply commenting when it comes to Annie specifically that there is some legitimacy to traditional African religion and being able to use that in the face of adversity. So anyway, the twins pick up Delta Slim as well, played by Delroy Lindo, as their pianist for the night, and they're ready to celebrate the opening of the juke joint. Meanwhile, Irish immigrant Remmick is begging a couple to lend him shelter from native Choctaw people. Their homes include, in their home there is clan paraphernalia, so of course they take their fellow white man's word for it because he's white. When the Choctaw people arrive at the couple's door, they are greeted with hostility, and their warning about the man they are harboring is ignored. When the wife goes into the home to speak with her husband, she finds that Remmick has sucked her husband's blood, and the couple are turned into vampires and become Remmick's goons. So the opening night at the juke joint is going swellingly. Everyone's excited about the music. Sammy gets a little peach kissing action, if you know what I mean. And once Sammy starts playing his music, he burns the house down. Literally, if you have sight into the spiritual world, which is what the movie gives us access to. Now, this montage of Sammy's song is really where the meat of the film lies. The film showcases how Sammy's song is connected to traditional West African music, rock music, Alvin Ailey dancers, hip-hop, rap, b-boys, traditional Chinese music, and everything in between. Under the hand of any other filmmaker, this scene could have come across as contrived and corny, but Coogler manages to infuse this message in a seamless and moving way. And I think this was a scene I think this was the moment where it's like, oh, this is something different, because for the most part, if you were to describe the scene to me out of context of this film, I would have said, cut that out, cut it out. It's doing too much. It's going to be confusing. People are going to be like, this film is trying to say too much. But it actually genuinely conveys this idea that music is visceral and has this deep connections to the beginning of time and the end of time. And it is such a beautiful thing to see on screen. Sammy's songs attracts Remmick attention because he knows Sammy's music will allow him to communicate with the other side, which means that his eternal life will feel more fulfilling. However, Smoke is reluctant to let in the trio of white people because their presence and sensitive reaction to any perceived insubordination by black patrons could cause big trouble. So this was a reality for many black people at this time. In the early 1930s, the Harlem Renaissance was still going strong. White people from white NYC neighborhoods, and even people from Europe would travel to Harlem to experience the electric jazz music that was taking over culture. While many of the white people were quote-unquote harmless allies, some of them did bring superiority complexes with them, which could cause some issues for black people. Unfortunately, Stax is not completely sold on Smoke's decision to reject the white trio, especially after learning that the club will not be profitable in the long run because their patrons do not have the money to spend. Mary tests out the trio on Stax's behalf, and she immediately peeps that they're weird. Unfortunately, when they turn around, they turn her into a vampire. Mary is able to easily make her way back into the club, where she also turns Stack into a vampire. In a chaotic series of events, Smoke finds Stack's dead body while Mary devours it. The club patrons are told to leave and congregate outside, where Remmick and his crew are able to turn all of them into vampires. Annie is able to catch on that something supernatural is occurring, and when Stack is revived as a vampire, she's able to warn everyone that he's not safe and retrieves garlic water that burns his skin. She also tells the group that the vampires can't come inside unless they're explicitly invited. Now, there's been a lot of conversation about the Childs, Grace, and Beau, but the biggest call out for the Childs, in my opinion, is the fact that Beau tried to leave the juke joint even after it was established that everyone should stay inside. And maybe I need to watch the film again to confirm, but I'm pretty sure that's a series of events. Everyone is told to leave, and then the staff, which include the Childs, are staying and discussing what's happening. Annie's like, bro, we can't go outside. It's going down out there. But Beau, in the last moment before people really are like, we need a hammer down in here, he tells his wife Grace, I'm gonna try to get the car. I'm not doing all this hoodoo voodoo shit that Annie's talking about. We're gonna go home. And I think that is the more indicting moment, because it's basically Beau and Grace saying that they don't want to be around black people and they don't believe black people, even though black people are giving them a very legitimate warning about what's happening outside. Either way, eventually Remnick makes his way to the door, where he makes his case that everyone should willingly become a vampire because it's the only way that they'll be free. Remnick reveals that the man who sold the property to the twins intended to use the sale to slaughter all the black patrons. Remmick argues that being a vampire is the only path to true freedom, since the system provided for black people can never give black people equality. Remmick appeals to his connection to the Irish famine to show how he understands the endless cycles of subjugation and inferiority that black people face. During this speech, I couldn't help but think of Jim Jones and the Jonestown massacre. For those who don't know, Jim Jones was a pastor who preached equality and had one of the first nationally recognized integrated churches. However, he was a despot and a drug addict, and also he was a sex pest, like a literal rapist, who spiraled into delusions. Paranoid about being found out, he moved his congregation to a colony in Guyana, where he would subsequently poison everyone, leading to the deaths of nearly 900 people. And so here's the fact that people often forget about the Jim Jones massacre. 70% of Jones' congregation were black people, and also 45% of his entire congregation were black women. So basically 50% of his congregation was black women. Essentially, Jim Jones killed over 600 black people with his massacre. I think Remmick is aligned to Jim Jones because when people feel ostracized from society, they can't help but feel attracted to people who assure them that they belong. But the desperation for a solution to their ailments and their isolation leaves them vulnerable to abusive people like Jim Jones and like Remmick, who have no interest in anything other than self-aggrandizement and who are willing to kill them in order to make sure that they stay on their pedestal. So, at this moment in the film, those remaining in the club remain strong, but Grace's husband Bo makes an appearance. Remmick switches to explicit threats, saying that he will kill their daughter if they're not invited in. Wanting confirmation that their daughter won't be harmed, she invites the vampires into the joint. Again, a lot of people see this as racial betrayal, POC betrayal, but I think a lot of people across the board on all races would be willing to sacrifice the lives of others to save their own child. So again, my bigger issue is with Bo and Grace colluding to leave the building even after it was confirmed by Annie that the outside was dangerous. So essentially, they don't believe black people, and this is what leads to Bo being outside in the first place. But I personally just think like a lot of people would probably be like, I don't know a lot of y'all like that, but I want my child at least to have a chance at living, so I'm willing to sacrifice y'all. Again, so I feel like people in their analysis of Grace's portrayal always forget her child was on the line. I think she had genuine reason to fear that this group of vampires could go ahead and kill them. Anyway, the vampires attack and it's a grim battle. Everybody dying, including Annie. Fortunately, Smoke kills her, and Smoke then enters a fight with Stack. But Annie's amulet protects Smoke from Stack's spike. So again, your ex gives you something to protect you. Keep that shit. That's the main lesson from Sinners. Keep the items your exes give you. Anyway, meanwhile, Remmick is after Sammy, who thinks the Lord's Prayer can protect him until Remmick is like, I know that one too. I'm Irish. I've been in the Catholic Church. I've been with Jesus. Sammy is saved by Smoke, and eventually the sun rises, killing all the vampires. Sammy, Smoke, and Smoke are the only non-vampire survivors. Smoke tells Sammy to go back home while he stays at the joint. Clan members arrive at the joint in the morning, hoping to kill all the black people. However, Smoke anticipated them and shoots at them from afar. Then he's fatally shot. He's able to see Annie and his lost daughter on the other side. He makes sure to kill the head clan member before he crosses over. Sammy goes over to his father's church, but we see that Sammy makes the decision to drive off with what remains of his guitar. He can't live the pious life his father has chosen for him. And so the movie is over. Until the post-credits scene. Hopefully y'all's mics. Hopefully y'all are still listening. If you are, thank you. Please give me a like and comment below. We jump to 1992, where Sammy is a venerated musician with a storied career. At the end of his performance, Stack and Mary pay an exorbitant amount of money to meet him privately. Stack regales how Smoke let him go as long as he promised to leave Sammy alone. They all agree that before the vampire attack, that night in the joint was the best night of their lives. The vampire gives Sammy his money and they leave. I'm not really sure about this post-credit scene. I don't think it was necessary. But it was just nice because we got to see more moments with well-liked characters, and I think basically Ryan Coogler wanted us to show, just so you know, Michael B. Jordan is very hot, and he's very hot as a twin. So either way, I highly recommend seeing this film. There's just so much conversation around it. Again, I was one of those people who was like, I can't do another one of these black trauma films, even though I do think that's a slightly pejorative. I'm one of those people who, seeing the trailer, I just thought that this film would be good, but just not for me. But I think that the film became for me because of how well executed it is. It's clearly having a cultural moment and might be a surprise award season contender. I don't think a lot of people really thought of The Sinners as a film that could inspire award season nominations, but looking at the buzz that it's getting, I think there are high hopes that this film is going to keep up its hype all the way until voting season for these awards that happen around October to December. So let's see. Until next time, this was Strategic Delusion. Thank you for watching.